Okay, you're listening to Hall Monitor on the award-winning Philadelphia Hall Monitor on WPPM 106.5 in Philadelphia, on Comcast Channel 66, and streaming live at phillycam.org. You can find us on Twitter at Hallmonitor WPPM, on our website www.hallmonitor.org, or on Facebook at PHM WPPM. Tonight on the program, Lance Haver will update us on SEPTA's bus revolution, and we will start our City Council preview. City Council starts on September 14th, not tomorrow, but the following Thursday, so there's a lot to talk about there. Denise, how are you tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. And we have your column to discuss as well, which I think people are very interested in. I've been hearing from people about it, so that's always a good sign, so people want to know more. And Lance, how are you doing tonight?
All right, warmest summer on record. And
Yeah.
today was just unbelievably hot for September.
Yep.
I am glad for those school kids. They only had to go half a day.
Yeah.
And I'm also glad for the teachers.
Yep. So that's something we're going to be talking about on subsequent shows as well. But the big story, the biggest thing that I think is kind of happening at the moment is SEPTA's bus revolution. And Lance, you've been doing a lot of work on this. The plan came out literally an hour before our show last week. So we've had some time to look at it. What are your first thoughts about this?
The question is, who asked for it? Why are we having a bus revolution? Traditionally, revolutions are from oppressed people who are rising up to throw off their oppressors. But here we have SEPTA itself, who can't be thought of as the oppressed organization, saying that they are going to go ahead and have a bus revolution. And so the question becomes, who asked for this? And if we could pull up the first slide, I think we'll see. Now, this comes from page 26 of the hearing presentation that SEPTA is going to use at their hearings. They start September 12th in SEPTA's headquarters, 1234 Market Street. And the last slide we'll have from my presentation will show all of the different meeting nights. This is a direct quote. The proposed network balances public input with the goals of the project and will result in a more usable and reliable bus network. So right there, we can see that this was never designed to meet the riders' needs. This was always designed to meet the consultants' needs, what the consultants thought was best, what the consultants believed people should want. And that becomes really the crux of the issue. When you have somebody who's from out of town, who doesn't ride the system, who doesn't understand what's going on, saying, well, the riders don't really know what the riders want. We really know what the riders want. And so we're going to have a revolution for the consultants. And the consultants are going to win the day, and we're going to be able to put in place what we want. Now, the truth is they tried that, and it didn't work. And the first rendition was SEPTA was tried to move people onto the subways. They tried to force people to make more transfers. They tried to do away with a lot of the popular rides, bus routes. And they got told absolutely not. Now, who told them no? Well, they were told no by City Council. Councilman Kenyatta Johnson, who's the chair of Philadelphia City Council's Transportation Committee, held hearings. And during those hearings, it was clear that the riders did not want this quote-unquote revolution. But it wasn't just City Council. Neighborhood after neighborhood had meetings, and in those meetings, the riders showed up and said, no, this is not what we want. We don't want to have to make more.
I don't mean to cut you off, but just to provide a little perspective, I've been talking about this just anecdotally with people. No one has said they like this. In any meeting I've been in, or any public official, anybody I've spoken to, nobody is in favor of this. Nobody likes these wholesale changes.
Right. And SEPTA itself was forced to hold another round of public input hearings. And they said, they're bragging, they said they held extensive engagement campaign in the fall of 2022 with dozens of in-person and virtual meetings. And what did they hear? Well, what they heard were this is again from SEPTA. This isn't what Hall Monitor is saying. This isn't what riders are saying. This is what SEPTA itself is saying. What they heard was many people were concerned that there hadn't been enough engagement. People were frustrated about having to make more transfers. There was a lot of concern about routes that were being eliminated and lots of comments about safety and security. Now, SEPTA claims that they have literally thousands of input from riders, but none of that has been made available to the public. All of that data, wherever it is, there's nobody who's looked at it other than SEPTA's consultants. And so we don't really know what it says. What we really know is what SEPTA's consultants say it says. So this is what SEPTA says they heard. There wasn't enough engagement. People are frustrated about having to make more transfers. They're concerned about their routes being eliminated, and people are concerned about the safety of riding SEPTA. That's what SEPTA says they heard. Now, SEPTA doesn't say that's what people meant. They go on to say, this is what riders meant to say. The most frequent complaints about SEPTA's bus service are that it is slow and unreliable. Now, that's not what they say they heard, but that's what SEPTA's consultants is saying that's what they meant. And I'm sure there are people who complain about SEPTA service being slow and unreliable. What is SEPTA then going to do about these complaints? And they say, well, we're going to look at why are SEPTA buses slow and unreliable. And they come up with 5 reasons. They say the SEPTA bus routes in the city of Philadelphia is one of the most difficult operating environments in the United States. Now, all of us know Philadelphia is a very old city. Many of the streets are very small. The grids that were originally laid out weren't laid out for bus routes. They weren't laid out for department stores. They weren't laid out for modern living. The second thing they say is causing the problem is southeastern Pennsylvania has lagged behind other regions in implementing transit priority measures such as bus lanes, queue jump lanes, and transit signal priority. So that's the second reason. And according to SEPTA's consultants, that's actually the most important reason. That's why the buses are slow and unreliable. Third reason is many streets have 4-way stops or a traffic signal at nearly every intersection. Again, this goes to the fact that Center City is very dense. It's an older city. The density allows us to have great restaurants, a lot of great culture, a lot of great opportunities, but it also means that there's a lot of streets that intersect. So the consultants say, well, that's really a significant problem that there's so many 4-way stops and traffic signals at so many intersections. Now, of course, that's not a problem for pedestrians, for people who want to walk in Center City. People who want to walk like the idea that they're 4-way stops and that they're traffic lights so they don't get hit crossing the street. But to the consultants, that's a problem. The fourth reason, according to the consultants, that we have a problem with the bus service being unreliable and slow is SEPTA doesn't have enough drivers. Now, we know this is a very significant problem. There are not enough drivers every day to drive the buses on all the routes. And the fifth reason that SEPTA says the buses are slow and unreliable is because the bus stops are too close together. There are too many routes that are circuitous. They go back and forth. Too many of the stops are block by block. And so they say that is the fifth reason. Now, what does SEPTA propose to do about it? Well, they don't think they can do anything about the streets, obviously. You can't just decide the city of Philadelphia is going to do away with all the small streets. So that's off the table. The second thing is, can they force the region to do something to make transit priority? That's what the SEPTA consultants say is the most important thing, but they're not even trying to do that in this proposal. Third is, can we do anything about the 4-way stops or traffic signals? Well, again, there's nothing in the proposal to do anything about that, and it's not really clear whether that's really going to be a good thing for pedestrians. Fourth point is, does the revolution, the so-called bus revolution, do anything about the number of drivers? Does it say, well, we should take some of the $400 million that SEPTA has put away for a rainy day and use that to hire more bus drivers, or to pay bus drivers more money, or to create incentives for people to become bus drivers? The answer is no, they don't do that. The only thing they try and address is the fifth point. So only 20% of the problems, if you believe that SEPTA consultants were right when they said people told them that they didn't want to make transfers, people told them they were concerned about safety, people told them they were concerned about the system being unreliable. All that the consultants say, though, is we're only going to address 20% of the problem. They don't do anything that would make transit a priority. They don't do anything to make it safer. They don't do anything to make it cleaner. They don't do anything to actually address the issues that they actually say are the most important of all of them. And so the question again comes up, well, then who wants the revolution? And if we do have a revolution, what will that do? Will that solve the problem? And again, if you read through the actual proposal and you read through what the consultants are saying, it will not. According to SEPTA, ridership will continue to fall. If you look at their projections, they don't believe that ridership will ever get back up to the level it was at pre-COVID. The speed of the rides will not significantly increase because 80% of what has to be addressed isn't addressed in the bus revolution. The system won't be safer. There still will not be enough drivers. And SEPTA's funding in coming years will be far short of what's needed. And I know our viewers have heard this before, but I'm just going to put it out there once again. SEPTA has said that next year it will be in dire financial situation. And unless it gets a new tax or new funding from the state or federal government, it will go into a doomsday budget scenario that will have 30% fare hikes and 30% service cuts. So the bus revolution doesn't do any of those things. It doesn't solve the problems, even if it's implemented, even if it's fully put into effect. It will not solve the major problems that plague SEPTA. Now, will the bus routes be better? This is a tricky question because no doubt some people will say, yeah, the bus routes are going to be better for them. Other people who are going to see their bus routes eliminated, it's not going to be better for them. Some neighborhoods will see more service, and other neighborhoods like Olney, which is going to lose two bus lines completely, are going to see less service. It's hard to understand why SEPTA wouldn't tell the people who are riding the routes that are going to be eliminated that their routes are going to be eliminated. Now, this is a very simple process. SEPTA has listed all 33 routes that it proposes to eliminate. All it would have to do is put up a poster in those buses and say, the SEPTA consultants recommend we eliminate this bus route. And here's what we suggest you could ride instead. Please come to the hearing and let us know whether this works.
And Lance, on that point, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but when I was going through the route changes, I noticed that a bus that I take has changed and doesn't go the same way. And to find what bus I would take, I have to go through all the other routes, like the 150 routes, to figure out which one it is.
Right. It's really something that's incomprehensible. You would think that on the page where they recommend we're going to eliminate this bus, on the same page it would say all the riders who use this bus could use this route instead or that route instead, so people would actually understand what's out there. But if all you tell me or all you tell a rider is your bus is going to be eliminated, what you really do is make people defensive. You don't tell me what I can do instead. You don't explain to me that, yeah, we're going to do away with this bus, but we're going to have this bus in its place, and that's really going to be better for you maybe. Instead, you're left wondering, well, what am I supposed to do? In addition, many people we know who ride SEPTA are the working poor. They're struggling economically. SEPTA every year puts together an operating budget, and they have a wonderful pie chart that shows what the economic situation is of most of their riders. Over half of SEPTA's riders are making $35,000 a year or less. Now, these people are struggling economically, and we also know that there's what's called a digital divide, that people who are struggling economically rarely have access to the same type of technology that people who are better off. So it's unlikely that people who are trying to access the internet through their phones are going to be able to follow all of these maps and all of these different presentations to understand what's happening to their bus line. The easiest way to talk to people about their bus routes is on the buses. And SEPTA places ads on the buses. They have the technology to do that. They can easily put a poster up on every single SEPTA bus that's projected to be eliminated, or every single SEPTA bus is projected for the route to be changed, and to say, hey, here it is. Here's what we're proposing. It's really not that hard to do. It's not very expensive to do. Now, I know SEPTA is running ads on KYW, and I know that they're going to be very expensive to run those ads. So why not just tell people directly on the bus? A lot of advertising is paid for to reach people who you want to reach. And the people...
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Lance.
No, I'm just saying the people I want to reach, if I'm talking about a bus route, are the people who are on the bus.
Right. And if they're only advertising with KYW, they're not going to get all the people who are affected by this. If you're serious about making sure that the bulk of Philadelphians know what's going on with the SEPTA bus revolution, you need to also put ads on WDAS. You need to put ads on Power 99. You need to put ads on WURD. You need to put ads on Sports Talk Radio, because that way you make sure you get everybody. But I don't think, for real, from what I've seen of this plan and from what you've told me when you talked about it, I don't know. I don't think that this is necessarily directed at Philadelphians. One thing we got to talk a little bit about when we talk about SEPTA is the fact that the majority of its board is from the suburbs. And while they're from the suburbs, they don't pay the majority of the money that is used to finance SEPTA. That's a city residents. And part of the reason why you can't get enough bus drivers or train drivers or anything like that is because if you've got a choice between making 50 grand a year driving a SEPTA bus and making 80 grand a year driving New Jersey Transit, which one are you going to pick?
I think you're absolutely right. And again, just for our viewers who aren't familiar, Philadelphia represents 80% of the local match. And that's even for the regional rail lines. The majority of the riders aren't from Philadelphia. And there are 2 members of the SEPTA board from every county. So there's the 5 counties. Philadelphia only has 2. The other counties each have 2, even though they contribute far less. 80% of the systems in Philadelphia, 80% of the local matches from Philadelphia. Now, the governor does have a representative on the SEPTA board, as does the state Senate majority and the state Senate minority, the state House majority and the state House minority. And while that seems reasonable because the state supplies a tremendous amount of the funding, what it really does is cut back on Philadelphia representation on the SEPTA board. So we don't have leadership. The president of the SEPTA board has been a suburbanite for the last 20 years. The vice chair has not been a Philadelphian for the last 20 years. And why we're even discussing a bus revolution rather than discussing safety, rather than discussing hiring more bus drivers, rather than discussing what we can do to make the system something so that people get back on it, is really a question. Again, why are we even discussing a bus revolution when the consultants who are in charge of this are saying it's not going to solve the problems? If the real thing is to make transit priority the issue, then why isn't that what we're discussing? And why are we discussing instead changing bus routes? One of the interesting things about bus routes is that they're somewhat organic. They get changed over time to fill people's needs and where people are going. And while it is absolutely true, a lot of the routes don't make sense if you look at them from a map, because they're not straight lines. They go around the corner, they go here, they go there. But that's to suggest that the best bus route is the straightest line. And I don't know that that's the right answer. I would think that the best bus route would be the route that serves the people who ride it best. And sometimes we want to go to the shopping center. Sometimes we want to go to work. Sometimes we want to go from this area to that area. And it's not really clear that because a bus route isn't straight or makes a number of turns, that makes it wrong, or that makes it bad, or that makes it something that we have to change. Bus routes are organic. It starts, people move, they open up businesses, they live based on where those transit stops are, and then something changes, we change it a little bit, we change it here, we change it there, and they grow up into these very difficult situations, which someone comes along 20 years later and says, well, why does this bus turn left here and turn right here and turn left here? We could just make a straight line and then it wouldn't have so many turns. And look, it would be a lot faster. And yeah, it would be faster, but that doesn't make it better. What makes transit better is serving the riders better. Now, here's the hearing schedule, but it's a little confusing again. I'm going to come back to this in a second. So you see, SEPTA's having many hearings. It's not a question of there's no hearings. It's a question of what are the hearings about? Usually when there's a hearing, we discuss who has the burden of proof. Many of us are familiar with criminal hearings where what we say is, it's better to let 10 guilty men go free than have one innocent man jailed. And we have a way of talking about the burden of proof has to be beyond a reasonable doubt in a criminal case. And in a civil case, we don't say that. We say it has to be the preponderance of evidence. It has to be more likely than it has to be beyond a doubt. When we're talking about changes to bus routes, what is the burden of proof? What does SEPTA's consultants have to prove to the hearing examiner to be able to get these changes implemented? And that's not clear. The second part is who's going to represent the riders? We know that SEPTA is going to use its lawyers and its experts, and it's going to have all these wonderful PowerPoint presentations explaining what's going on. But we don't know who's going to represent the riders. If it's going to be people showing up who don't have access to the information because SEPTA's consultants have not made it available, if riders can't ask questions and get answers, if there's no representation and there's no clear burden of proof, then it's really not a hearing. What it really is a community meeting where people can come out and say what they want to say. And that's great, but we shouldn't mislead people into thinking there's going to be a hearing and people are going to be able to get their questions answered. There's going to be cross-examination. There's going to be discovery. And we're going to get to the bottom of why are we even discussing a bus revolution when the real issues, safety, the real issues are, do we get the drivers we need? The real issues are SEPTA's funding. Why are we not discussing those issues and instead discussing changing a few bus routes? Now, I do hope people come to the hearings, and this will be available in our next mailing. We'll mail this out as an email blast so people will know. But in coming to conclusion, here's what SEPTA says. They say it will be an improvement. There'll be 30% more frequent routes, 64% of the riders within 10-minute walk of frequent transit, and 99% of the riders will maintain access. That does sound wonderful. It really does. And it's one of those things where you look at it and you go, you know what? Why wouldn't I be in favor of this? Until you look at their next slide and you realize something's not quite right. Because here's what they're saying. Yes, they're going to have more frequent rides, but that's because they're going to eliminate 33 bus routes. So if you do away with 33 bus routes, you're going to be able to have other buses run more often. And it's not clear whether that's really a good thing or not. But the most important thing to consider is what they say, and that's down at the bottom of the screen, and that is the number of hours will remain the same. So they're not going to increase the service. They're not going to increase the bus drivers. They're not going to do anything about transit priority for bus lanes or for other things. What they're going to do is take the bus routes away from some people and give them to other people. And again, if you're one of the people who gets a more frequent bus line, it's good for you. But if you're one of the people who loses the bus route and nobody tells you what you can do instead, it's not good for you. And that's not how public transit should work. Public transit should really work in conjunction with the riders, not telling the riders what they should like, what they should do, or what they should appreciate. And again, going back to it, the very beginning of it is very clear. SEPTA says, just going to click through just to get the quote correct. The proposed network balances public input with the goals of the project and will result in a more useful and reliable bus network. The public is going to be balanced with what the consultants want to do, and that is fundamentally backwards. The role of experts in our society should be to help people achieve what their desires. They should help people do what they want. They should help people figure out how to live their fullest lives. The role of experts in our society should not be to tell people what they ought to do. It should be to help people achieve what they desire to do. And in this case, it's very clear. The consultants came in with their own agenda. They said, this is what we believe is best. And now we're going to hold some public hearings and figure out how to adjust a little bit around the edges so we can do what we want to do and balance it with the goals of public input. And that's what we're facing. I'm hoping as we go forward, somebody's going to join us, join Home Monitor in asking, why are we even discussing a bus revolution when it doesn't solve the fundamental problems of public transit? If the real problem is we haven't made transit a priority, let's focus on that. If the real problem is we don't have enough bus drivers, let's focus on that. Taking away one person's bus line to give it to another person doesn't solve the underlying problems, will not get SEPTA more funding, will not make transit a priority, won't give us more bus lanes, won't make it the lights work better for SEPTA buses. All those things that we could do, which would add to everyone, we're not focusing on. Instead, we're focusing on taking away from some people and giving to others.
All right, Lance, thank you so much. And next week, you're going to attend that meeting, that first meeting, and you're going to tell us about it next week on our show.
That's right. It's, again, we can call that back. We'll send it out. It's September 12th at the SEPTA headquarters. And it will be interesting, again, whether the hearing examiner will tell us who has the burden of proof and what the burden of proof is. Does SEPTA have to say and prove that this is in the public interest? Or is it really just enough for them to say, this is what we want to do, and the riders have to prove it's against the riders' interest? Who has to prove that this is a good thing or a bad thing? You would think that SEPTA would have to prove that this is in the public interest, but that may not be the position the hearing examiner takes.
All right, Lance, thank you so much for that. And we're going to be, waiting to hear what happens next week. And regardless, this is going to be a major change for people. It's going to be a major change across the city.
And again, if SEPTA loses its funding, all this discussion is pointless. If they have to have a 30% reduction in service, all these things we're discussing in the bus revolution are meaningless. So again, not focusing on the real issues, funding, transit priority, focusing on what's the old expression, we're moving the chairs in the Titanic as it goes down.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. All right, Lance, thank you so much for that. Now what I'd like to do, this is our yearly City Council 101. And City Council is set to begin next Thursday, the 14th, for the fall session. In a way, that to me feels like the official start of the year, because you have the summer off. They end at the end of June. There's a long time off. Then we come back in September, and even though they have about 6 weeks off in the wintertime, it's not as big of a break. So this is kind of like New Year's for me, and I'm very excited about it because I love City Council. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just go through the basics this week. Next week, we're going to talk more about agenda items and things that council might be doing this year. Okay. But this segment of the show is just going to be City Council 101, just a refresher for everybody. So we're going to bring that up now, if we can. And what we'll do is, we'll just walk through this, right? What is Philadelphia City Council? Well, Denise, you and I both know that Philadelphia City Council is the legislative body of the city of Philadelphia. Just like the federal government, Philadelphia has an executive, legislative, and judicial. Our executive is the mayor and the mayor's cabinet. The judicial is the Court of Common Pleas and the municipal court. And our legislative branch is Philadelphia City Council, which, by the way, this is of interest to no one except for me. But we have 17 members of City Council. If you go back about 150 years, City Council was a bicameral legislature, meaning it had a lower house and an upper house, and it had like over 100 members. So I just want to throw that out there. So this City Council has 17, which is a fraction of what it used to be 150 years ago. City Council passes legislation that is either signed, not signed, or vetoed by the mayor. And those three things are very different. If the mayor signs a bill, it becomes law. If the mayor does not sign a bill, it still becomes law after 10 days. And if it's vetoed, it can go back to City Council and the veto can be overridden. We'll talk about that in a second. The only time that the mayor has what we'll call a pocket veto, which is where he doesn't sign it and it just sits and eventually the legislation times out, is coming up once every 4 years. When City Council gets reelected, any piece of legislation on the docket goes away and they start over again. And that in that last session or two is where the mayor can use a pocket veto. But that's just another little piece of trivia, really.
Mhm.
We have 17 members of our Philadelphia City Council, 10 of which are elected from districts, numbered districts throughout the city. And we have 7 members elected at large, meaning they run throughout the entire city. 2 of those at-large seats are reserved for minority parties. In Philadelphia, the Democratic Party is the majority party. And on City Council, up until David O resigned, you had 1 Republican and 1 Working Families member party in those at-large minority seats. Right now, because David O resigned, that seat is vacant. But come November, we'll know who will take that seat. And City Council is elected every 4 years, much like the mayor, and it's in the same election cycle. So this fall, this November, when you go out to vote for mayor, you're also going to vote for City Council. Okay? So the kind of legislation that City Council produces, they produce bills, which are laws. They also have two types of resolutions, privileged and non-privileged. A privileged resolution is something that City Council says, we want to do this. And it's to hold a hearing or to make the will of council known in some way that they can actually take an action. Okay? A non-privileged resolution is them calling, for example, on the state legislature to do something. So it's not something they have any power over, but they're making it known, this is the will of City Council. We would like you to do this. To pass legislation, you need 9 votes. 9 members of council must vote in the affirmative for a bill to pass. If the mayor vetoes, you need 12 votes to overturn a mayoral veto. We saw that in the last session. There was a mayoral veto that City Council overturned. Here's your current membership. Again, 10 districts. Mark Squilla, Kenyatta Johnson, Jamie Gaudier, Curtis Jones, Darrell Clark, Mike Driscoll, Kelsey Lozada, Cindy Bass, Anthony Phillips, and Brian O'Neill are your 10 district council members. And at large, Kendra Brooks, Isaiah Thomas, Jim Harity, Catherine Gilmore Richardson, and Sharon Vaughn. You're noticing that there are 2, that's only 15 members. There are 2 vacant seats right now that will be filled in November. And just so you know, Darrell Clark, the current council president, is not running for re-election. There's only 1 candidate on the ballot for that seat. And at large, Sharon Vaughn is not running for re-election. So there will definitely be a change there. And we'll also have 2 new candidates. And there's only really 1 competitive at district race, which is Brian O'Neill's district, 10th. and we'll see what happens in November. We're going to talk more about that in the fall. The leadership of city council comprises of the city council president, who is, after the mayor, and Denise, you can correct me if I'm wrong, they're probably the most powerful person in the city. Perhaps in some cases, depending on who the mayor is, more powerful than the mayor.
In fact, you're right, because when Ed Rendell was the mayor of Philadelphia, the only person as important, if not more important than him, was John Street. In fact, they were seen as a dynamic duo, so much that when John Street was inaugurated for mayor, he and Rendell wore matching suits. They were bright red, they were garish, but they were matching.
So the council president, sartorial choices aside, is a very important position, and that's currently held by Darrell Clark. Darrell Clark is not running for re-election, and we talked a little bit on the show about who could possibly replace Council President Clark. We're going to be talking more about that throughout the fall, and certainly after November, because that's when that'll become a little clearer, I think. You have a majority leader who is the leader of the majority party on council, and his counter is the minority leader. We do not currently have a minority leader or a minority whip, because the minorities on city council, the Republicans and the working family parties, could not agree on who the minority leader or whip would be, so they don't have one. The whip is the person who gets the votes in line should they, need that service. The majority whip right now is Mark Squilla, a candidate for city council president. And then there's a deputy whip, which is Cindy Bass, and also a candidate for city council president. So that's how the leadership works. And on a smaller body, you could say, why so many leadership positions? That's 6 leadership positions out of 17 people. And that's a good question. But this is the way it's always been. And it gives certain members a little more, clout, and is also important for maintaining the order of council. One of the hallmarks of Darrell Clark's city council presidency over the last 12 years has largely been harmony among city council members. You don't see a lot of fights spilling out in the public. You see a lot of things, a lot of unanimous votes, even with Republicans on city council. And I'll tell you, Republicans on Philadelphia City Council they're not Trump Republicans. They're more moderates, and you see a lot of working behind the scenes to do that. So there's a united front. We'll see what happens. New council
or at
president.
least there's the perception of a united front, because one of the things that the Democratic primary exposed a little bit was how harmonious a lot of these people actually weren't. I mean, you had Derek Green and Sherelle Parker and Helen Gim and Maria Quinones Sanchez and Alan Baum, who all came out of council, and they made no secret of how different they actually were during the primary.
And that's right. And it wouldn't surprise me if our new crop of city council candidates or city council members don't experience the same thing, or aren't experiencing that right now. So there are multiple committees on city council. And this is kind of like Congress. There are all different kinds of committees. I'm not going to go through all of them, but they're all important in their own way. And I think the ones that I think are the most important, the ones we focus on a lot, appropriations and finance. Because, if you've been watching Home Monitor for a while, we talk a lot about budget in the spring, because that's when the budget's passed. Education deals with the schools. There's a lot always going on there. Housing has become a much more important committee over the last 5 years. And, L&I, parks, public health, public safety, there are a lot streets. That's probably the number one committee that people complain about, or the number one office. And the transportation committee is going to be very important. It's a committee that probably doesn't get as much attention as it should in years where there aren't going to be major changes. But this year, this fall and beyond, I think that committee is going to be fundamentally important. And usually the committee composition has a chair, a vice chair, and members. And that usually it's not always the chair is a Democrat, vice chair is a Republican. There aren't enough Republicans or third party candidates to do that. So sometimes you'll have all Democrats on the committee. It can work that way. But each of these committees is important in its own way. And if anybody is curious about hearing more about any of these committees, wants to learn more, we can try to have the chair on to talk about it if you want. You just let us know, email us, reach out to us, and we'll talk more about that. And how does a city council meeting work? So when you get in there, if you've never gone to one, it is worth it. If you're just interested to see how it works. And if you go, find us and talk to us, and we'll tell you what we have to, what we think about it. But they always start off with an invocation. They approve the journal of the preceding meeting, meaning that they say, okay, this is what we talked about last time. We agree that that's right. And by the way, all this information is pulled directly from the city council agenda. City council members can ask to be absent from sessions. It happens once in a while. The mayor will send communications. Sometimes it'll be a veto or him letting them know I signed this bill. And then city council members introduce their bills and resolutions, which are then referred to committees, and we'll talk about that in a second. City council committees will then report. So if a bill was about, let's say, renaming a street, that would go to the streets department. It would come back out. It would get passed by that committee and come back to city council for 2 readings. Okay. After that, they have what they call special business. Sometimes they don't do this. Special business most of the time deals with the mayor. It's either the mayor is coming to speak, which he does once a year to give the budget address, or when they're overriding a veto, they have special business, which again happened in the last session of council. Then they get to the agenda. So here are the bills on the first reading. All right. So these are bills that were passed by the committee and now are going to be heard. Bills have to be heard twice in city council. So you'll hear it 1 week and then you'll hear it again the next week. And then after the second week, it can be passed. People can do public comment. If you want to be heard on a bill, you usually get 3 minutes. And Denise is smiling, and I know what she's going to say. But so go ahead.
This is an official decree of writ of mandamus, because I had to get that out. Public comment is easily my favorite part of city council, because you don't know what's coming out of these folks' mouths. Now, you're supposed to only comment on legislation that is up for a vote. Nobody follows that rule. Nobody. In fact, I can count maybe on both hands the number of times that people have actually gotten up there and spoken about what they're supposed to be speaking about. Or what they'll do is they'll sneak in what they're supposed to be speaking about before going off on a tangent on anything ranging from having their house taken away from them by eminent domain to whether or not COVID is a hoax. So if you're looking for some true entertainment in the council session, it can be found in public comment.
That is absolutely right. And I highly recommend it. I enjoyed thoroughly. So we get through the bills after the public comment, and then the council members can make speeches. They usually do, and they can take a while. And then after that, the meeting is adjourned. And then they tell you, okay, we're going to meet again next week or whenever it's going to be. And then we're done. The typical city council meeting can take anywhere from an hour to about 3 hours, I would say. Part of that depends on how much legislation is being presented that day. And if there's a hot button issue, a lot of people will come out to talk about it during public comment. So that's another thing that sort of determines how long the session is going to be. What I'm hearing about this first session that's going to come up next week is that it's going to be quick. People don't think a lot's going to happen the first week, but it'll be subsequently throughout the year, throughout the session, that we'll see more legislation. So we'll see. So that's usually how.
I'm sorry, and they have 2 sessions that are almost always the longest session that they have. No, I'm sorry. No, it's 2. Right before the Christmas break, anything that wanted to be passed in the fall that didn't get passed, they bunch it all up at that session. Then at the end of the year, anything that didn't get passed throughout the year goes into that session. So sometimes that session takes as much as 4 hours long, especially if the budget hasn't been passed. And then this year, just to make it interesting, in January, the first council session of the year will also be the swearing in of the mayor and the new city council. So that one is usually held at the Academy of Music and has all of the pomp and circumstance, including inaugural addresses from the mayor, from the new mayor and the new city council president before the session starts.
Yeah, and last time it was held at the Met because I think they couldn't get the Academy of Music. That's the only time on the Met stage. So it was kind of fun. But that's a good event too. It's interesting to watch and see what happens. So that's and I think this year, Denise, the last session in December is going to be even longer because if they don't pass that stuff, it goes away and they have to reintroduce it. So it might be an even longer session. The longest session I ever remember was when they were making the changes to the tax abatement. And we were there until about 6:30 or 7 o'clock that night, I think. That was the longest that I'd been present for. And that was before the pandemic that happened. So
the longest one I went to was during the pandemic when they were trying to pass the budget.
Yeah.
That hearing took what was it, a week?
Yeah, because and that's one of the parliamentary things they can do. They don't like if they stop for the day, they don't have to like stop the meeting. They can just say we're taking a break and then come back the next day, which is what they do during budget when they're negotiating. So that's how a meeting goes. And we, if people want to hear more about that, we can talk more about it on subsequent shows. If you want to make a public comment, you reach out to the clerk's office, and the phone number is here, 215-686-3406. You have to call in by 3 p.m. the day before. And what I should have put on here is that the way that you find the agenda is on Legistar, which is and I'll put this in our newsletter on Friday, how to find the calendar and legislation and all that. I'll do a primer on that for Friday's newsletter, where you can see what's coming up, and if there's something you're interested in, you can follow it, and you can call and speak about it, and come in if you want to talk about it. If you can't come in, you can submit your comments, and they'll be made part of the record. So there's different ways for you to have your opinion heard on this. You can also call us and talk about something if you don't like it. We're always more than happy to hear you out. So that's kind of what City Council is. That's City Council 101. I know we breezed through it. We'll have a little more detail on this on Friday in our newsletter so people know what's going on. And we're going to talk more about it next week. But it's very interesting. For me, it's a lot of fun. It's one of my favorite parts of this job, covering City Council. And we're really looking forward to it this year. There's going to be a lot going on. So that's City Council in a nutshell. And Denise, we've been getting some feedback about your column that we had in yesterday's newsletter. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and why you wrote that column and why you think it's important.
Okay. Well, one of the things that city council occasionally does, especially over the summer, is rent. Well, I don't know what you call it, renting out its facilities, but they let other legislative bodies use their facilities. And last Thursday, no, it was last Tuesday, city council allowed the Pennsylvania House's Committee on Housing and Community Development to use city council chambers to come in and have people come and talk to them about Philadelphia's landlord tenant office. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, the landlord tenant office is the office that handles evictions here in the city. You can either get evicted by the sheriff's office or the landlord tenant office, and most landlords choose to go with the landlord tenant office for a variety of reasons, ranging from cost to streamlined paperwork, or at least that's what I found out in this hearing. The reason why people are talking about the landlord tenant office is because, unlike when the sheriff evicts someone or when any other entity evicts someone, people keep getting shot when the landlord tenant office evicts them. It's not a always occurrence necessarily, but 3 people, a woman that was shot in March that is now suing the landlord tenant office, and 2 other people and someone's dog have been shot in the middle of what are called lockouts, which is what an eviction is. They come in, they tell you to get all your stuff out of here, and then they change the locks so you can't go back in. Now, this committee of the House of Representatives came to Philadelphia because there are 2 bills, one in the House, one in the Senate, that were proposed after the woman that was shot in March was shot, because I guess getting shot in the head makes people pay attention. About how the landlord tenant office is constituted, and the fact that instead of sending constables or sheriff's deputies to do their work, they have people who are private contractors that handle the lockouts. And these folks aren't necessarily the best trained people. In counties where there are constables, like if you go to Montgomery County, which is right over the border from us, and you have an apartment and you end up falling down on your rent and you end up getting evicted, they have a constable, and they have a constable to come and do the lockout. Now, constables, unlike the people in the landlord tenant office sends out, are elected by citizens. They are thoroughly trained. There's usually a mental health professional at the ready in case there's some need for them in the case of an eviction. And that is how it's handled there. How it's handled here is completely different. And that's why this bill was proposed, to kind of make how it's handled across the state more streamlined. Another example of why this committee met on Tuesday last Tuesday was because shortly before that meeting, a man in Allegheny County was killed. And so far 75 sheriff's deputies and other law enforcement professionals that were part of that attempted eviction are on administrative leave because there were so many bullets found. They said, okay, this couldn't have gone correctly. That was kind of the impetus to get people to come in and talk. Now, what is being proposed and what has somewhat been implemented, here the city council had, hearings to say, we need to do a little better when it comes to the landlord tenant office. And now there's a provision that says you have to have 2 people go to a lockout, one of whom has to be a constable. But since Philadelphia has no constables, they have to get constables from somewhere else. And that's usually one of our suburban neighbors. But a constable from a suburban neighbor is not someone who was elected by Philadelphians. So, many consider them to be armed private citizens coming to facilitate this lockout. Now, what everyone needs to kind of keep an eye out for in Harrisburg is the progress of these bills. One introduced in the Senate by Senators Sharif Street and Nikki Saval, and one in the House introduced by Representatives Tariq Khan and Morgan Cephas, about making the process more streamlined, where everybody has to have mental health professionals on hand. There has to be mediation done. There has to be, at the very least, notification to the person who's about to be evicted that they're about to be evicted, because there was a gentleman that spoke as a part of this who was evicted from his home, and he didn't know until 10 minutes before, he didn't know until they got there that they were coming to evict him, and he only had 10 minutes to get out all of his belongings. And this is a person with a disability and health issues, and he had cats, and there was no, if you've ever owned a cat, you're not getting the cat out of the house immediately into its carrier and the whole bit in just 10 minutes. So there are a lot of discussions that are going on regarding this that everybody kind of needs to keep an eye out on. And I've been kind of covering it in my columns for Hall Monitor. So if you want a little more detail on what happened at this hearing, you can check out my column, which was in our newsletter on Tuesday. And also, if you want to see the hearing itself and just hear the testimony of people who are involved in all sides of the landlord-tenant issue, you can go to YouTube. They have the House of Representatives Housing and Community Development Committee has a YouTube channel, and you can sit down and watch the hearing at your leisure and hear what was said about this very important issue. Because let's face it, we're the poorest big city in America. Evictions are a problem here, even though a lot has been done to make Philadelphia a model for not having as many evictions. People are still ending up evicted either because they're down on their luck and they missed the payment, or they weren't able to honor a landlord-tenant agreement, or in some cases you even just have people who are like, I don't feel like paying my rent. They're few and far between, but you have them. And because of that, we should make sure that an eviction is not a death sentence.
Well, that's right.
So if you get a chance to look at that, please do.
And the other thing about this that I don't think a lot of people realize, an eviction on your record can preclude you from renting another home or another apartment, because it comes up on a database.
Yes, because I found out through this hearing that there's a national tenant organization that rates tenants by by a numerical scale. The man I was talking to you about, this man with a disability that was evicted from his apartment, he had tried to find another place to live and had a good lead on one until this score popped up, and he was told he couldn't be helped because his score was like 34 or something really low. And because of that, this is keeping people from being able to have a place to live. And also, and this is a comparison between how the sheriff's office does evictions and how landlord-tenant does evictions. The sheriff's office also presented at this hearing, brought the pamphlets that they give those they're about to remove from their home with things that they can use to get themselves back on track, resources that they can use to find a place to live for the night, or a permanent housing and things like that. And one of the things the legislature is considering is making that mandatory, in addition to making it so you're not completely kept from having a safe, comfortable, and effective place to live in based purely on a score due to one mistake that might have happened because you were down on your luck.
So we're going to have to leave it there. Denise, thank you so much. Next week on the show, Lance will report back from that SEPTA hearing, and we will have our city council roundtable preview. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.